Welcome to the VCDNP for this panel discussion. I'm going to give you a couple of seconds just to sign on all of our participants online, and then we'll kick off. In the meantime, just to say to everyone in the room, if you have, when we're having the discussion and you have questions, introduce yourselves and put your hand up, obviously, and then you will get a microphone. You have to speak into the microphone for the online audience. The rest of us can hear you, and then just introduce yourself fully. Okay. Okay. So welcome to everyone who are here in person. Thank you for coming, and welcome to all our viewers online, on Zoom and on YouTube. We're going to talk today about the code of conduct on the code of conduct on the security of radioactive sources. As you know, and those of you who have come to the panel before, these panels are about the benefits of peaceful uses and how nuclear security as an integral part of peaceful uses, just like safety, supports the expansion of these applications so that they can better contribute to address the challenges that we face, the key challenges that we face at the moment in the world. So today we're looking at the Code of Conduct, as I've said, and we have a panel of experts here that are going to help us to better understand the importance of the code and how its universalization can support the expansion of peaceful uses. For those of you, what we're going to do is not have presentations. The presentations have been prepared and they will be put online with the report of this panel on the website. But we thought it would be a good idea to have a discussion. And so that because we really have the benefit of extremely experienced experts here who have a lot to tell. And please feel free. I will start with Dr. Abel González, and we'll work our way through the panel, and I'll have a discussion at any time if you want to ask anything, if you want to contribute. At the end of when we've spoken with everyone, we'll open it up for more questions, etc. But if you feel at the moment that you need to ask something, do put up your hand. For our online viewers, you can put questions into the chat Q&A, into the Q&A. And for those of you who are on YouTube, you can send questions to VCDNP, events@vcdnp.org. There we go. Okay. So we're going to start with Dr. Abel González, and he is a senior advisor of the Argentine Nuclear Regulatory Authority, and he's a member of the Commission of Safety Standards of the International Atomic Energy Agency, and a member of the Argentinian delegation to the IAEA's General Conference and Board of Governors, and those of you who are diplomats have probably seen him at the board. He worked for many years for the regulatory branch of the Argentine Atomic Energy Commission, and he joined the IAEA as director of the Division of Radiation, Transport and Waste Safety in 1980. Dr. González has participated in UNSCEAR, the UN Scientific Committee on the Effects of Atomic Radiation, since 1968, and he is still a member of UNSCEAR. He was also the first Argentinian delegate, and he has represented the IAEA between 1985 and 2005. And he has been a representative of Argentina in UNSCEAR since the 54th session, is that right? In 2006. So Abel will tell us about the history of the Code of Conduct.
Thank you, Ingrid. Thank you. Well, I will start, first of all, good morning, and thank you to be here and to share these ideas. I will start to saying that, believe it or not, until the year 1985, we gave security by granted. In the same way that you gave by granted that your money in the bank is secure. I mean, not so sure. But we gave security by granted. We believe that radioactive materials have to be safe, handled safe, and to be safe, they need to be secure. And we said nuclear materials have to be safeguarded, and to be safeguarded properly, they have to be secure. They gave it by granted. But in the year 1985, something happened that changed this idea in Latin America. Really, Latin America was the starting of this problem, and that was the accident in Goiânia, in Brazil. This was an accident that could have happened in any part of the world in that moment. It was very simple. A clinic, have a radiological clinic, got bankruptcy. The judge closed the clinic until the bankruptcy issue was resolved, with the normal security that you have in this moment. And a fellow, a scavenger, that was not a criminal, was a fellow just picking up things, so that there was, he believed, abandoned. There was a lot of iron there, all the beds were iron. And therefore, one night, he came with a friend and took all the beds out, and he saw this shielding of a radioactive source, said, my goodness, there's a lot of metal, carry everything to her home, cut all the iron, including the source inside of cesium chloride, something like this. Cesium chloride is like talc. After few days, there was cesium in all the city. And you will say, well, sometimes I compare this with Chernobyl of Fukushima. In Chernobyl and Fukushima, so impressive accidents, there was few villages contaminated. When you have a city of several million people that nobody knows whether it's contaminated or not, you cannot imagine. We, and I said we, because we are in very close relation with our friends in Brazil, particularly at that time, the president of it was a personal friend. They call us immediately, and we work with the Brazilian colleagues in all the accidents. Well, we have to measure, do a whole body counting measurement to 120,000 people. You know what this whole body counting is. We have to use the football stadium to measure so much, to handle so much people. For us, was a shock. For Brazil and for Argentina, this was a shock. But the rest of the world still continue to believe that security was given by granted. I came at that time with the director here, and I pushed it very much for a standard. And for the first time in 1994, it took me 9 years, the board approved a standard of safety with a clause of security. The first time the word security was used in a standard of the agency. But both of us believed that it was not enough, because the standards do not commit the countries, and we believe that the commitment was necessary. But I have to say that the big countries were not convinced. They said that that Brazilians and Argentinians, we have a red herring. This was a red herring. There was one exception, France, because France has an accident. With watches was a different thing, but they were concerned. Therefore, we make an association, illegal association with the French, to organize a conference. They put the place, Dijon, near the wine, and we put the technical committee. And this was the first time that the agency, in the year 1998, organized a conference on security. This was the first time. But this was a conference of mixture of people, technical people, etc. We were convinced that we need the regulators to be involved. And in the year 2000, finally, we organized a conference of regulators in Buenos Aires. December 2000, it's important that you remember that day. Nearly 100 regulators came. And they started to realize that there was a problem, but still the idea of a red herring was there. Of course, 9 months after was September 11. And what was used to be a red herring became to be the more important issue in the Atomic Energy Agency. Another conference was organized here in the Castor, in the Hofwood, probably was the biggest conference organized by the agency. I believe it was unbelievable. And the process started. There was reluctance. I mean, there was, our idea was to have a convention to produce obligations to member states. But people don't like conventions. They go to the parliament. I mean, with the safety convention, there were a lot of problems you cannot imagine. And the thing was collapsing. I thought that the standards alone was not enough. And in one meeting that we'll never forget, the French governor came with a brilliant idea. He said, well, let's do a code de la bonne conduite. And I asked, what is a code de la bonne conduite? There was not in the statute, there was. And we started to define a code de la bonne conduite. And finally, the board approved a code de la bonne conduite, a code of conduct.
And this was in what year?
This was, the approval of the board was, let me check the year exactly, was in September 2003. In the middle, many things happened. One important event that usually disappears in history is the G8 meeting in Evian, in France. This was called by Chirac to put Bush, Angela Merkel, all together again after Iraq. You remember that in Iraq they were all fighting. They were separated. To put them again. But here in the agency was so that an opportunity to involve the big countries in this. And that meeting was important because President Putin took power in that moment. And they exceptionally invited President Putin. President Putin was in the meeting at the time when the ambassador of Russia was saying, this is an important problem, but it's a problem of the Soviet Union, not of Russia. Therefore, the participation of Putin in that meeting was essential. And in that meeting, there was a declaration of the G8 saying, we need a code of conduct. And the same ambassador came the next day and said, we are ready to cooperate. Therefore, this was really a big change. And the code of conduct was a success. I tell you the truth, to my own surprise. One thing that I believe that was important for the success was an idea of the Director General. He said, once that you have a code of conduct, let's do the following. I will send a letter to the country asking the country, do you agree with this? Are you going to follow this? And the country answers, saying yes. Therefore, it was not legally binding, but the political bondage was so important that countries started to really control the sources. And this happened for a very simple reason. Before the code of conduct, I remember in one country, I don't want to mention, the fellow in charge, he told me, look, to do this, I need money. And I go to the Ministry of Finance, and the fellow said, what, control of sources? Well, priority 200, I have money for this, for this, for this, for this. After the code of conduct, and with the letter signed by the president of that country, saying I will follow, the same fellow was the Ministry of Finance said, look, this is what our president said. And the money appeared. This was the secret. And really has been a big success. And which I will say is that given this experience, that for me was surprising, I tell you the truth, that this was a success, I believe it's an opportunity to use this same approach to solve many problems that we still have without solution. I mean, with our Brazilian colleagues, for instance, we just give the idea that this can help, for instance, to solve the problem of the denial of shipment in transport. That is a very serious problem.
And this is the denial
to facilitate the transport,
of radioactive sources.
Yeah, exactly. Which is a problem affecting everyone. I mean, once I here in Austria, I needed a treatment, and I came there and said, I'm sorry, the material that was coming was stopped, I don't know where, somebody, and you cannot have the treatment today. This happened to me, that I invented. Therefore, it happens every day. The question of denial of shipment is a very serious issue. And as an example, there are many other examples, and I believe that this was really a good idea, and somehow I believe that Goiânia, in that sense, was very positive. Of course, not for the people in Goiânia, not for our Brazilian colleagues, but was very positive for the world because show clearly that security could not be by granted. You need really to ensure that the control, be radioactive material for safety or be nuclear material for safeguard, shall not be relinquished. That is the key word, shall not be relinquished. And this is what the Code of Conduct achieved. And if you want to know this history in more detail, I am in your hands, of course.
Thank you so much. It's fascinating because as you touch upon the issues, so many issues, but the political commitment that's so important, and we know that what we struggle with in terms of awareness of the benefits of peaceful uses in many countries at the highest level, there's so many challenges for legislators and regulators and when they're faced with having to take action on security or safety or anything to do with the applications of nuclear material or radioactive sources, there are so many other priorities they have. So a part of that is the high-level outreach that was so well executed by the Director General at that stage, and it continues today. And we will later hear about the recent meeting that we had last year on the Code of Conduct, and also the work that diplomats and higher level officials can do to create that understanding and awareness with their governments of the benefits of the Code of Conduct, amongst other. But you were also mentioning the radioactive sources, that the challenges that we have with the transport of radioactive sources, and that there are many countries that are struggling to access those sources, buy them. They're becoming more expensive because the ships are being delayed, or shipments are being delayed, or your shipping the shipping companies are finding it too challenging because the regulatory authorities in the various countries have different standards. It's not harmonized. So,
and has a consequence on security, this Ingrid, because the denial of shipment has a consequence on security. Because what happens is people send a source via some, go to this place, then to this airport, then to this. And in some places stop. Therefore, the transporting company tries to select another way. And you lose control of the security. Because the sources start to go from places where are not used for that.
But
it's a problem.
But it also has an impact on expanding access to peaceful uses or continued access to peaceful uses because of the fact that we can't, it's becoming too difficult to have access to those sources. So a code of conduct in creating, how do you see that as being able to help with the code of conduct? Can it just bring more attention?
No, on the transport, I believe that we need a different code of conduct.
Yes, but a type
to
of
facilitate. I mean, the government of Brazil, just 3 or 4 conferences away, I don't remember, called for a parallel meeting to the General Conference to discuss the issue. And in that meeting, the idea said, well, why we don't have a code of conduct? Now the General Conference is asking the Secretariat to try to draft a code of conduct to facilitate. I mean, that the countries facilitate, they don't wash their hands, because in this moment, just a fellow in an airport can stop
A shipment.
a shipment.
And then you were also saying something very interesting when we spoke the other day was, and this is a challenge that we face a lot within the IAEA when we discuss, as diplomats discuss, the role of the IAEA, the activities of the IAEA on nuclear security, is that it's not expressly written in the statute as something that the IAEA is responsible for. So what is your response to that? Why is security not expressly written in the statute of the IAEA?
I have heard so many idiocies on that you cannot imagine, Ingrid. For instance, one that I heard is, at that time the word security was not used. My goodness, the Security Council was established. It's not the Safety Council, it's the Security Council. Well, fortunately, I had a personal friend that was the first inspector of safeguard of the agency, by the way, who was collaborating in the drafting of the statute. And he told me the reason. Very simple. Because the people who wrote the statute gave by granted that security was an important element of safety. For what reason? Because a source or an installation or an activity that is not secure cannot be safe. But if it is secure, not necessarily safe. You can put all the army alrededor, and have an accident. Therefore, that was the reason. And if this reason is accepted, unfortunately it's not yet, all these problems that there are in the agency, that the interrelation between the two and the problems in the Board of Governors, and that we have one safety report and one security report, and then a different report of security, all this fall into pieces together. And this is something that happened before. The same has happened with transport before. You remember that in the General Conference was a separate report on transport, until somebody said, but transport is a problem of safety. Put it together, now transport is part of the safety report, and there is no problem.
No, it's no problem.
I believe that there is a linguistic problem here, unfortunately. In Latin, this was very clear. There was the expression securus, keep the thing, the money, the Roman coins proper, and salvus, that was the equivalent of safety now. But for some reason that I tried to investigate, in all the European languages, except English, and I believe that also Lithuanian, the root salvus was lost, was used with a different meaning, more religious meaning. For instance, in the Counter-Reformation, the word started to be used to identify Jesus.
Okay.
And now we have even a country called El Salvador. It is the name of Jesus. And for any reason, they disappeared from all the languages. I mean, sûreté and sécurité in French is the same root of securus. Sicherheit and Sicherung in German is the same root of securus. The salvus was lost, but remain in English with safety. In other languages, this creates a problem. In Spanish has been qualified the word with technological and physical, but it's not correct, really. And this linguistic problem has confused people a lot. This linguistic problem is important.
So,
let me say that in English, if you go in Oxford Street and you're somebody in the street, what is the difference between safety and security? Probably he will not know what to tell you.
So let's look at the implementation and of the code of conduct, and we're going to turn to Teresa Salabit. She has been working at the Philippine Nuclear Research Institute for more than 30 years, and in the last 5 years her focus has been on safeguards and on security, in particular in their implementation. And she's also a supervising science research specialist in the Nuclear Regulatory Division. And recently she's been involved in the amendment of Philippines' nuclear law, among other, to provide the regulator with more autonomy. So Teresa, in which specific areas did expressing political commitment to the code of conduct and implementing the provisions therein give the most benefits to your country?
First and foremost, good morning to everyone, and happy to be here. It's the first time to be in VCDNP. To answer your question, for the implementation, we are more of, since we have this political commitment with the Code of Conduct, we also have been implementing maintaining the safety and security of radioactive sources, as well as the importations, the import and export of radioactive sources, as well as the management of disuse. So these are the three things that we are working on, making sure that they are safe and making sure that they are secure. Because of our main mandate is to make sure that we are protecting the people, our country, as well as the environment for any harmful effects of ionizing radiation. Now, basing from our experience, we have been doing implementation of making sure that the licensees are being managed, being regulated in terms of how they make use of these radioactive sources and also this nuclear material. The nuclear material that we have is basically for depleted uranium, for shielding material, but most of the time we are regulating licensees that is of the different practices, which is industry that covers category 1 to category 5. And more so, we are working more closely with our category 1 and 2 sources because there are issues, particularly on security, on how they would handle to protect these assets of ours.
Sorry, and the category 1 and 2 sources, those are the ones that you use for...
We have this for irradiation, teletherapy.
For cancer treatment.
Yeah, for medical treatments, and also for the brachytherapies. We have also the facility of irradiation facilities.
For food.
For food and
food
sterilizations, yes.
Okay.
And we are more working closely with them, particularly for the category 1 and 2, because of how dangerous it is.
Yeah.
The issue that we have particularly encountered is when they're going to, particularly for cobalt-60. Recently, they have this shipment of these sources, and we have issues regarding the importation. With that, we have different when you're going to transport or you're going to transport radioactive sources from the origin to the Philippines, it goes to different ports. Unfortunately, there was one instance that there are one country that has a different protocol in which that it was not informed to the Philippines way ahead of time. So there was caused a delay, and that part of that delay was more of for PNRI, or even my section, made some worrisome because of it delayed of coming to the Philippine ports, and then therefore the issue of securing during transport was our concern. How we're going to make sure that this cobalt-60 will be safely be transported to the Philippine ports at a given time. So there are some issues, particularly on securing transport, not only for category 1 and 2, but most so in the category 3, or the portal mobile devices, which is the cameras. This is very troublesome for us because of its mobile. Securing it in a site, they're being transferred from one site to another, is a challenge for PNRI, for the regulators, because of the providing more information, requiring the licensees or to the regulators the information that we need, particularly where is this portal gauges or portable cameras being transferred, how frequent is being transferred in that one.
Are the portal gauges, are they the portal monitors for radioactive material that you're talking about?
Yes.
Okay. And is this all part of the code of conduct? How does the code of conduct help in this regard, or are these additional challenges?
In particularly for the code of conduct is the management of the disused sources, and how we going to doing the import. Particularly, we mostly import our sources.
Okay.
So that's why it's a challenge for us, is how our stakeholders be aware of the requirements when it comes to radioactive material, and how can we collaborate or have coordination with them, with the stakeholders, particularly when it comes to trade. How can we work on to have an effective or efficient way of monitoring or even regulating this practices.
And this is the code of conduct helps with that guidance on how to do
yes.
it. Okay.
With that one, we were able to have some memorandum of agreements. We have a close coordinations of doing procedures, protocols to strengthen in that particular sense. And when going to do some management of disuse, I agree to our gentleman from Argentina that we have this issue of denial of shipment. We have this campaign with our stakeholders to even talk to our shippers or to the carriers of how can we solve limiting or making a flexibility when it comes to the shipments of radioactive sources or even nuclear material. This is what we are discussing right now. Particularly, the Philippines are now working on having this nuclear energy being introducing to our energy mix. So we are now covering how can we address the gaps, that we make sure that the code of conducts, the guidance in import, export, and even the disuse will be implemented. We included that one in our legislation. We have this in our nuclear law. Even though that the code of conduct is a non-binding document, we make sure that it is have a statement in our nuclear law. So making sure that all of us, the stakeholders, not only the stakeholders, the licensees, and also our officials are aware that we need to make sure that we effectively securing and making sure that all the practices is in safety in procedures.
So the code of conduct also brings together stakeholders.
Yes.
It has this additional benefit that it helps you to bring together stakeholders and facilitate these discussions. And as you were saying, you're looking at expanding into nuclear power.
Yes.
So this is very helpful for you. Even though it's the code of conduct on radioactive sources, it helps you to
Make it a baseline.
To make it a baseline.
Yes.
Okay, that's very interesting.
Yeah. So,
so you would say if you had to explain to a fellow regulator in another country why it would be important to what are the benefits and why it would be important to implement these provisions and why it outweighs the challenges, this would be...
Yeah, for regulators we have, the only thing that I could say is in our constitutions, we have the statement of protecting our people and environment, and also our sovereign rights. In all hazards, if it's a conventional hazard or non-conventional hazard, which is a man-made, it is one of us to campaign to make sure that we effectively do our commitments in protecting our country when it comes to the use of radioactive materials, as well as the nuclear materials. Yeah, so now it's a big challenge for us because there are still some groups that are unaware the importance of this code of conduct, and particularly our officials, the higher officials, to make sure that they are see the importance. How can we even have these priorities being for implementations, as well as the sustainability programs. Yeah, because of when you're going to make sure to have an effective and efficient regulator, we have to also make sure that the capacity buildings, the workshops, and also all the things that they need to do the implementations in the regulations must also be supported by the government itself.
By the government. I think I'm also just quickly going to thank you so much for that. And on this point, I just want to ask Heather to come in on that from the IAEA side, specifically because we've addressed or Teresa's raised the issue of the high-level engagement and also the workshops and the capacity building. Can you tell us a bit about what the IAEA does in this regard to support countries, and also the meeting that took place last year on the Code of Conduct? Heather, just to introduce her, she's the section head of the Division of Nuclear Security of the Division of Nuclear Security's Nuclear Materials and Facilities section, which is called MAFA, at the IAEA. And as the MAFA section head, she provides strategic guidance and oversight for the section's activities, including the development of nuclear security guidance, International Physical Protection Advisory Service, IPAS missions, and training and expert support for member states' efforts to establish effective security systems for nuclear and radiological material in use and storage and transport, as well as nuclear and radiological facilities worldwide. And she has 2 decades of experience in nuclear security and non-proliferation issues. So you're the perfect person to answer these questions.
Well, thank you, and thank you very much to the Center and to you all for the opportunity to be here today. Speaking about the code's one of my favorite issues. Personally, it's one of the first issues I ever worked on when I was working in a national capacity with the IAEA 20 years ago on import and export guidance for radioactive sources, the supplementary guidance to the Code of Conduct, but also because it really touches every single member state. And so you've heard some of the applications, whether it's in medicine or industry, in research and education. These radioactive sources are absolutely vital for all member states' achievements under the UN Sustainable Development Goals. And so it certainly is an issue that every member state should care about. There are over 15 million transshipments of radioactive sources globally each year. And to kind of illustrate the magnitude of the safety and security concerns, some of you may be familiar with the IAEA's Incident and Trafficking Database, the ITDB, whereby member states can choose to voluntarily report incidents involving the loss or theft or trafficking of nuclear and radioactive materials. Of all of the cases that member states have reported to the ITDB, over half of them, 59%, involve radioactive sources. It's literally thousands of cases. And so we know that this is an area of interest to member states. We know that it's, critical for international security and sustainable development. And so the agency really does a number of things that relate to helping member states on radioactive source security and in meeting some of the provisions of the non-legally binding Code of Conduct. So the first thing, of course, is the actual dissemination of the code itself and its supplementary guidance. So Dr. González mentioned in 2003, the board approved the Code of Conduct. The next year, the board approved the supplementary guidance on the import and export of radioactive sources. This is a topic that was addressed in the code, but of course you can imagine it's tricky. It requires a lot of international coordination. And so it was determined that additional guidance could be useful there. And then even more recently, in 2017, we published the supplementary guidance on the management of disused sealed radioactive sources, which is a major issue. What do you do with sources throughout their life cycle, in use, but also at the end of their use, and then in between? And so we publish, obviously, and make available these codes and guidance documents. We also have a range of capacity building efforts that help states implement those provisions, everything from expert and peer review missions that we can do if we're requested by a member state. We have a number of training courses that relate to some of the competencies of the Code of Conduct and the supplementary guidance, essentially upon request of member states, helping them strengthen, enhance, or in some cases even establish their regulatory framework for the management, safe and secure management of radioactive sources. We also host frequently conferences, symposia, and workshops to bring together member states to share their experiences and shared challenges in this area. And so there are essentially a full range of activities and assistance that we can provide. One other neat thing that we can do that I think really touches on some of the provisions of the Code of Conduct is our software application that was recently unveiled at last year's General Conference. This is our RICE Plus software program, which we provide to member states. It's entirely customizable, but what it allows them to do is, first of all, to set up and maintain their national registry of radioactive sources, which is one of the key provisions of the Code of Conduct, but it also helps them with every single aspect of regulatory management, from licensing the use, licensing the import and export, managing those international interactions. Import-export, of course, requires a lot of coordination. To that extent, we also maintain a database of points of contact for import-export, so that countries know whom they should reach out to when they're trying to import or export a source and they have questions, they need the authorization. It tells them immediately who to go to. And we hold meetings, points of contact meetings and training for those points of contact. And so it is really a full range, full suite of activities that we do related to the code and helping member states implement their provisions.
Great.
Yes, comment
please. Absolutely.
I believe that this was very important, these two issues of the guidance. This show that at the time when we draft the code, there were two issues that we could not solve. Mm-hmm. The export-import and the management of these used sources. And I would like to refer to these two issues because are very important. The code was very well drafted. We have to think that to Australia. No? Australia was in charge of the drafting at the time. They have a brilliant lawyer, really, who helped very much. But we could not solve these two issues. There were many problems with export-import, among others that there were federal countries where the state in the country could export without knowledge of the government. This was one issue. Okay. This was solved after the code with this guidance. And much more complicated was the management of this used source. Since I am not a diplomat, I can refer to the real problem. And the real problem with the management of this used source was that the Soviet Union have sent sources to all the countries that were part of the Soviet Union. When the Soviet Union collapsed, this country wanted to send the source back to Russia. And Russia said, I'm sorry, you are now independent. It's your problem, not my problem. This was the real issue. And to solve this issue, I tell you, was very, very difficult. But at the end, the guide solved that issue as well. Therefore, all the circle was completed.
Fantastic. That's really useful and interesting to understand that better within the context of where it's come from. But I want to turn to Dr. Bello. who is a director for nuclear safety and security at the Nigerian Regulatory Authority. And he has a PhD in analytical chemistry from the University of Abuja and 21 years of working experience in the regulatory authority. He also works with the IAEA as a consultant, and he was a nuclear security subject matter expert for the International Nuclear Security Advisory Mission, or INSIRF, to Sudan in 2022, and at various times member of the IAEA team with the Integrated Nuclear Security Sustainability Plan, INSSP, to various countries in Africa. And he has promoted and propagated the implementation of the Code of Conduct on safety and security of radioactive sources in various countries in Africa. So from your experience with the implementation, specifically in Africa, can you tell us from your point of view and this experience, what are the benefits of the Code of Conduct and what are some of the challenges for, particularly in Africa, having listened to what we've heard here?
Okay. Thank you very much, Ingrid. Thank you, the panelists. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I'm very happy to be here, and I'm going to be sharing my experiences. With regards to implementation of the Code of Conduct, there are several benefits that comes with it. The first benefit is that the issue of safety and security of radioactive sources is taken at the same time. You know, we don't talk of safety and come back to come and talk about security. So you address both issues at the same time. The second benefit is that the code cuts across the whole lifetime of a radioactive sources, from when it is manufactured to the time it is disposed. So you find out that in the code you have issues about its manufacture, what should be done when you want to use it, when you want to transport it, when it has become disused, when you want to import, when you want to export, and so on and so forth. All these issues have been addressed as one in the Code of Conduct. The other benefit is that the code also talks on the issue of orphan sources and sources which may not be safe or which are in unsecure condition. So apart from the regular sources which have been licensed by the regulator, the code also touches other areas where the source could be in a situation that it needs to be safe and brought, safe and secure and brought under regulatory control. An additional benefit of the code is also the issue of reuse, recycling. So if I take to my country a radioactive source, which is about 1,000 curie, and in another 5 years, it has become like 100 curie. If the law of my country allows reuse, then such a source could be reused, taking cognizance of safety and security provisions. So these are some of the benefits that the Code of Conduct on the safety and security of radioactive sources do bring to our countries.
And when you, one of the experiences that you have in terms of, if we're looking at expanding access to peaceful uses, optimizing peaceful uses, how do operators and regulators in your country, in their own competencies, how do they work side by side to maximize these benefits of the technology while achieving this common objective of ensuring safety and security of the community?
Thank you very much for the question. So I'd like to start by stating that the Federal Republic of Nigeria wrote to the Director General of the IAEA in April 2012, stating our commitment, a political commitment to the Code of Conduct on the safety and security of radioactive sources, and highlighting that Nigeria will be following the provisions of the Code of Conduct. So in that regard, Nigeria has established an independent regulatory body. This independent regulatory body has been established by law, and it has powers to make regulations which are the requirements for the operators to follow. It has powers to receive notification. It also has power to issue licenses, to carry out safety reviews and security assessment. It also has power of enforcement. So in this regard also, the law has prescribed responsibilities for all the parties involved in the management of safety and security of reductive sources. The regulators know their responsibility. The licensees, they know their responsibilities. And the fact remains that the licensee know that by law, they have to come to the regulatory authority even before you start a practice. You know, this because the law has duly given them the responsibility for ensuring for safety and security of the reductive sources in their under them that they are working with. So the operators, they are aware of their responsibilities under the law. The same thing with the regulators, the same thing with the members of the public. And so you find out that even the code of conduct encourages discussion among the national stakeholders, as well as asking the individual states or the countries to foster international cooperation. So in our country, for example, in Nigeria, the regulators and the operators, they engage regularly through meetings, through workshops, and through what we call participatory compliance engagement. So if we notice that a licensee or an operator has some deficiency in complying with a part of regulation and is taking some time, as regulators, we go to them and ask them, what is the problem? So we want to fill their pulse. We want to know what is happening to them, why this safety requirement or this security requirement has continued uncomplied with over a period of time. So we engage with them, and everybody understand that under the law, the regulators has responsibility. The regulators must come for inspection, for example. The regulators will issue license. The regulators has powers of enforcement. And the operators, we also provide information to the regulatory authority in compliance with the code of conduct. This kind of information has been well stated in the code of conduct, the safety assessment, the security plan or the security assessments, as the case may be. And the code of conduct also states that the regulator must have power to request for any kind of information from the operator. And these are being elaborated in our law. So in my country, the regulator and the operators, they work hand in hand with, together with the understanding that has been expressly stated in the law. Each party has been given responsibility under the law, and this each party is mandated by law to comply with this mandates.
Thank you so much. So at this point, can we just see, is there anyone at the moment who has a question in the room for any of our participants? I know we have some questions online. Yes, please.
Thank you. I'm Ricardo Erosa, the Deputy Chief of the Mission of the Brazilian Mission here in Vienna. Thank you, Ingrid and VCDNP, for organizing this very interesting panel, and also with these distinguished panelists. It's always a pleasure to listen to Dr. Abel González. He's like a living encyclopedia on nuclear issues. And I would even suggest the VCDNP to establish some sort of fellowship or course that he could teach diplomats like me to learn, because he knows all these issues.
And
so
have
well.
monthly webinars just with you talking about the
No, I just wanted to make a comment or a question that is somehow related to the code of conduct, but more to security issues in general. that's a point that is frequently made by G77 countries, is that nuclear security should not be an obstacle or be hampered peaceful applications or peaceful transfers. And my question first is this like a precautionary principle, something that can happen, or is it something that actually happens? Are there cases where you would see security concerns being invoked as a reason not to, or to make it more difficult? We heard about the transport issue, but it's not something that happens by purpose. It just happens, and we should avoid it. And then on the issue that maybe more related to the code is how to help countries to have to implement a graded approach, because security is like something that the more you have, the better, but you never know the limit and what is really necessary, because then some applications can be costly and burdensome. So is the code a tool, or what are the tools that the countries have to establish a really graded approach to what is appropriate? Because you mentioned the accident in Guyana. How can a country decide to do what is really necessary and enough, not too much?
Okay.
Thank you so much. And Norton? Yes.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for inviting me again. And I just want to latch on to a colleague from Brazil, especially with the graded approach. As an example, a small country like ours, Namibia, and has got almost no nuclear industry, is burdened very much with regulating, having everything in place, having the experts, having all the laws in place, but no industry. You can also not ask from users of radioactive sources, let's say, to pay a fee because it might just kill the business. And therefore it makes it very, very difficult to build up an industry that at the end of the day can self-fund also the regulatory activity. And that's why this graded approach, it takes me back to the 60s when I was not around, but where they learned what is important and what is not important. Of course, there were some accidents, for sure, and this is not what we are saying, but the graded approach is something that I really, really would like to hear your views on, especially if, and like Ingrid said, the access to the peaceful uses is very, very important. And if you have many barriers to jump over, decision makers lose patience, they lose interest, and then don't see a real benefit. So thank you. Sorry, long question.
Thank you. So we'll just take, for the moment, we'll take those two questions. Just Tony, online, is anything related to these specific two questions? Otherwise, we'll come back to, okay, so we'll take those two questions because they're big questions, and it's, I think first we'll turn to Abel,
Okay.
and then we'll...
Perfect.
Well, the question presented by my friends from Brazil and then duplicated, I believe they are essential for the future. Are key questions. The first one is on that reluctancy. And I believe, this is my personal opinion, that this have occurred due to something that happened. And that is, I repeat to you, the Code of Conduct was approved the 10th of September, 2001. I was there in the board. The next day, I remember people coming to the board with their TV sets, and we in the board, we saw in the TV the buildings in New York falling down. And since that day, there was somehow a link between security and terrorism. And this has produced problems in many countries, a reluctance to this connection. And obviously, that is, the things are unsecure. The terrorists can very much use things that are unsecure. But the fact is that until now, the security issues that we have are similar to Guyana. Many of them. People who rob the source, people who rob a truck transporting a source, these are the typical cases. For how to deal with that issue is not so easy, but I believe that we have to somehow disassociate this idea that we are doing all this because of terrorism. We are doing all this because of security. And with that, we will help, certainly, in terrorism. This is the first question. And the second, which is also very important, up to when? I mean, how much you have to do? And I believe that if this association that should have existed from the beginning, security with safety and security with safeguard, that question will be automatically answered. Because the safety specialist will say, I need so much security to ensure that radioactive material are safe. And the safeguard specialist will say, I need so much security to ensure that my nuclear materials are properly safeguarded. And this will give somehow the order. But in this moment, this is not happening. The guidance on security are discussed separately. They are not part of the standard of the agency according to Article 3 of the statute. And this have not been solved. I'm sorry. This problem has not been solved. I believe that this will give answer to your second question. But these two questions are the more important for the future.
So, in short, basically, delink from terrorism is one answer, and I think, you know, that is a lot of countries, especially developing countries, have felt that terrorism is not their priority in terms of security, but the priority is in providing life-saving applications through nuclear, such as cancer treatments, such as food safety, agricultural development, food security, and not seeing security as part and parcel of peaceful uses. But unfortunately, we've had, and I think another challenge or another issue that brought this home to the G77 specifically, and well, globally, was the denials of and delays of shipment that was so acute up into 2011, was it between 2003 and 2011, where at one stage, because of the concern around the misuse, potential misuse for terrorist purposes of radioactive sources, one could not, there were problems delivering radionuclides that have a very short half-life, and so if they are not transported by aeroplane as quickly as possible to the majority of countries in the world that don't make them, then you can't use them in for cancer treatment, cancer diagnosis, etc. So then we get back again to the denials and delays of shipment, which I think made a big impact on countries in terms of that security is can stop access to peaceful uses. I want to go to Heather at this point and just see what you can add in that regard.
Thank you, and thank you for those two excellent questions, which actually, the more I think about them, are linked. You know, so if we think about safety and security, it's really two sides of the exact same coin, because they have the same goal, which is, you know, protecting people, society, the economy, the environment from potential, you know, bad effects from ionizing radiation. When we talk about safety, we're concerned about accidents, and when we talk about security, we're concerned about human-made events. Security shouldn't be an obstacle to trade or any of the peaceful applications. And, you know, when we think about security and security measures and procedures, you know, we don't talk about those as being somehow a hindrance to the applications. Security shouldn't be either, and in order to achieve that, though, you really have to consider security as integral to everything that you're doing at a facility. And so, for an example, the earlier that we can incorporate security concerns and procedures, including in the design phase for facilities, when we're thinking about since we're talking about red sources, let's say a medical facility. When we're designing that facility, when we're designing where the materials will be stored and how they will be secured and all of these things, the earlier we can incorporate some measures for security and security concepts, the better. The lower the cost will be, the more streamlined operations will be, and the less likely you are to have any sort of delays or repercussions or what have you. And so I say your questions are linked because also graded approaches comes into this as well, right? The idea that the measures that you take should be commensurate with the risk and the threat. And so getting that right is exactly how you avoid, right, any of these, unintended consequences, if you will, whether it's increased costs or operational time, what have you. There is a great emphasis in our guidance publications and in the trainings we do on achieving this graded approach, right, based on risk. And so in all of our nuclear security series documents, including those that deal with radioactive source security, this is something that we talk about and outline principles and recommendations. And then even through our training, kind of in a more practical manner, as an operator or regulator, how do you provide and ensure that very graded approach? Because you're right, it's absolutely critical to getting this right and to ensuring that these materials can fully be harnessed for their peaceful applications. So thank you for raising it, 'cause it's a really important element to keep in mind.
So I just want to piggyback on that and to get back to the issue of graded approach or the challenges that regulators face, because this is something I think Norton specifically mentions, and we've had discussions about this, and we actually wrote a paper together on this about the challenges that you have as a regulator in a small country or a big country with small use, not a lot of use of nuclear material, radioactive sources, etc. And the burden for the regulatory authority. And often what we see when countries start out with developing their regulatory authority is they have one or two people in the Ministry of Health, because that's where the sources are mostly used. And then they have a plethora of responsibilities. And I'm very glad to hear that there is this graded approach within the guidance documents, but countries are often raising this as an issue. So where is the gap, and how do we actually ensure that we don't have an over burdening of our regulatory authorities, and how can we grow regulatory authorities organically with your nuclear applications? So shall I ask you, Dr. Bello, what are your ideas in this regard and your experience?
Thank you very much. I think the first thing I want to say is that the code of conduct on the safety and security of radioactive sources is complementary to other safety standards that are in place and security guidance that are in place. And if you look at these documents, the extent of your regulatory body should be dependent on the number of applications that you have in your country. So if I don't have a research reactor, I don't have a teletherapy center for radiotherapy, I don't need to have people in that area. So first of all, our countries, we need to know what do we have. For example, my friend from Namibia, I know definitely they have a radiotherapy center and they have so many category 3 sources, for example, in the mines, because there's a lot of mining that's going on in Namibia. So you will not have staff for research reactor, you will not have staff for applications you don't have. You only have the few staff that you need depending on the application. That is what we learn from the safety standards and the security guidance documents, which are contingent to the code of conduct. So, and I know that most of the challenges in the country, especially in the African continent, has to do with what the government understands to be a regulatory body. You understand? And that is why I always advocate this issue of the IAEA needs to go to some of these countries, talk to the government, talk to the parliament, talk to senior government official on, first of all, why, for example, they should submit a political commitment to the code of conduct, and why we need to, they are, even though not legally binding, but in a way obligated to accept the provisions of the code of conduct with regards to establishment of an independent regulatory body whose strength depends on the applications that you have in the country. If I have several, for example, the Namibia example I gave, we know that there are several mining that is going on in the country. So, and usually they will have high activity source gauges and low activity source gauges in category 3 and 4. Mm-hmm. And if you look at, these are really, down below in the categorization table, what is called the RSG 1.9, So even talking about graded approach now, the effect you want to give to a radiotherapy center using cobalt 60 is not going to be the same effect from the point of safety and security you want to give to a gauge in category 3 and 4.
But so what you're saying, in effect, if I hear you correctly, is that the challenge lies with, and I think, Norton, with your experience being at head office dealing with these issues, perhaps you may agree, but it sounds as though you're saying that it's an issue of where the government would identify sources, financial resources, to be able to ensure that this is properly regulated. Because it's a bit difficult, right? Because that's where Norton was saying as well that they can't maintain an independent regulator because it's not a big enough sector.
Okay. I think from my own perspective, the first thing is about government commitment. And I think that is why the code is addressed to the government of our countries. Yeah. So government must understand what they are getting into when you are sending a letter to the Director General of the IAEA saying we are providing political commitment, because the code has some basic provisions. You must have an independent regulatory body. You must train the staff of the regulatory body, the emergency staff, and staff of your security organization. You must, this regulatory body must have a system in place where you can receive notification.
But that's not graded, is that?
I'm coming to that. I'm also coming to that. The code of conduct is also is very clear. It says the regulatory body should be able to receive safety assessment report or security plan and so on and so on. But if you ask me, a security plan is not needed for a category 4 source, for example. It has to be treated, from the prudent management point of view. So against a category 1 source, that you need to provide the security plan. So this grading is going to be part of the system of an effective regulatory body when it is in place. So as I said, government has to provide commitment first. Mm-hmm. I know that, yes, in several of the regulatory bodies, there are issues of resources. However, I don't think the resources must be the one to come first. Government has to commit itself to the provisions of the code of conduct and then establish a regulatory body. And Etta said, in our presentation that the IAEA has several means of helping our countries in different form, to if we want to develop a system, an efficient system of regulatory control with regards to safety and security. I think these assistants are there, and once government is committed, government will request from the IAEA, we need this kind of assistance. I think this is where to start, and not necessarily, saying that these resources This big resources is there, you have to go and take it and establish a regulatory body.
Yes, please, Maria.
Thank you.
Teresa.
With regards to our friend from Namibia, we have issues regarding, when we are the regulator, we have issues not so much on the category 1 and 2, but more on the category 5 and 4. Because of, they have this, the operators would always think this is, the sources is very small. The practice is not that much. That is when the complacencies happen. Now we are now experiencing that there are some issues when we do some safety and more safety of this category 5 and 4. What we're doing more is we have all those regulations in place. They know all the things, the responsibilities of the operators, and what the needs of the regulators when it comes to their assessment or evaluations on their licensees. The problem right now is not only complacencies, but also the management side of this is only small, I don't need so much money to invest. But the problem is on the latter part, there are some we have right now is issues of missing gas chrometers. This being used in the university, but the transferring of these units to one university to another is not being monitored. So that is why we need to give importance to the small sources as well as the large, so the big sources, because it's happening right now. Right?
Yes, Heather.
These are important points, and I want to come back to something that you said, Ingrid, because I think it's particularly important for permanent mission representatives. You were talking about government commitment and the resourcing issue. And I have to say that when we talk to member states about, particularly those member states that might not have yet made a political commitment to the code, we have about 151 member states that have made a commitment politically as of this month. But for those that haven't, as well as for some countries that have made a commitment and are working towards the recommendations, we hear the two biggest challenges. Number one is the need to raise awareness at very senior levels of government about the code of conduct, about the importance of radioactive source safety and security, and how that relates to environmental, economic, trade issues, et cetera. And the second issue that we hear that's related to, obviously, lack of awareness is resource allocation. These are real challenges. And we heard this even more recently in last year's June open-ended event of legal and technical experts working on the code of conduct issues. We asked some really great questions of the audience and got a really good feedback about some of the remaining challenges in the future ahead. And if we have time later on, I'd love to go into that. But these are indeed the big issues we hear about from member states.
Yes.
Thank you. Okay, so this is Adil Ahmad Khan from Pakistan. I would just like to continue what actually Heather said. Safety security by design, and we hear a lot of it in SMR's case. Now, there's a big debate in IAEA on that. Developing countries, especially the G77 countries, are not in favor of having safety security together and by design. Because what we feel is that the safety security standards would be imposed on us. So our leverage, what we really want, our obligations will not be respected. So the manufacturer, he gets, like the reactors manufacturer, he gets to impose his perceptions, his designs, or his levels or codes of security, safety on us. I want your comments on that. And second, if I'm not taking a lot of time, for the climate change, there's a lot of talk in the security perspective. We very well understand that it's a safety issue. There could be floods, there could be landslides, there could be so many things. But how exactly would the climate change affect security? That is something which, like, we need to stretch our thoughts a lot on that to figure out how would climate change specifically affect security. Thank you.
Thank you. Abel, do you want to
Yeah,
start?
well, this is a typical example of what our Brazilian colleague was saying before, and I agree that sometime myself, when I am in a meeting of the board or meetings of the agency, and I hear a speech that try to solve all the problems of the world. I mean, with security, we try to solve the problems of the world. And the problems of the world are big, as we know, and the statutory function of the agency are much limited, and our competence is much more limited, and there are many other agencies in the United Nations to deal with the problem of the world. And probably if we are a little more modest and simply say that what the country have to try to do is to ensure that radioactive materials, the control of radioactive material and the control of nuclear material is not relinquished. And then perhaps people will be less concerned, because this is something that is not so difficult to do it. I mean, after all countries of the world ensure that the control of money in the banks are not relinquished, no? Otherwise people will take the money out of this country. I don't want to simplify the problem. I know the problem has many subtleties, but we have to be careful not to deviate from the real problem, and sometimes we have deviated with the real problem. And for that reason, I believe that this connection with terrorism, which I don't want to diminish, but this connection with terrorism has somehow, sometime, pushed for a deviation from the real problem. And many people believe that the agency want to do something else and not to control that the control of sources are not relinquished. As our Brazilian colleagues have said, I believe this is a key issue. This is a key issue that has not been solved. When you are in a meeting of the Board of Governors, you give the impression when the people use the word security, each one of them means different things. And I believe that if we don't solve this issue, we are spending a lot of resources and creating problems, creating reaction, creating people that don't want to collaborate because they believe that there is a hidden agenda.
Yeah.
And I believe this is a key issue, really.
So the issue of trust, I think, and where we believe that when we listen to each other, we're hearing hidden agendas, which, as you say, potentially stemmed also from the time of connecting the sources and their security with terrorism, when it's always been a material security issue, and how not to relinquish that control of the sources. And now when we're talking about for instance, when we're talking about small modular reactors in future, and how do we, as you've mentioned, if we have security and safety and safeguards by design, from my perspective, I see this as something that actually lightens the burden on regulators, because it'll already be inside these technologies. In advanced technologies will be easier to regulate, right? But here again is the challenge of trust. So, Heather, do you have a response to that?
Absolutely. Thank you for raising these. They're really important perspectives. And so to clarify, when I was speaking about security by design earlier, I was speaking strictly just to security, not any attempt to bring in safety and address it at the same time. Because we know that managing safety security interfaces is critically important, but it's challenging, right? They have the same goal, but at sometimes some of the measures and practices might run contrary to one another. And so we recognize that, as you say, the burden for all of this falls on regulators, and if we're talking about nuclear materials safeguards too, but anyhow, we're actively looking at ways to manage safety security interfaces and to assist member states in doing that, including through the development of a tech doc that will be forthcoming. So you're absolutely right, really challenging issues there. And I was just speaking to security by design. But your comment about security being imposed on people, I think, is an important one to talk about. Certainly, you know, we always say that nuclear security is the responsibility of the state. And so when we're talking about the code of conduct, this is entirely legally non-binding and voluntary. When it comes to nuclear materials, of course, the international legal instrument there, the Convention on the Physical Protection of Nuclear Materials and its amendment, also voluntary. It's binding, but states can choose to become a party to it or not. We certainly think that there's value in universalization because it does provide states some recommendations, but at the end of the day, it's up to them to determine national regulations and their own practices. So one of the important things about the Code of Conduct in particular, though, is that once you make a political commitment to it, you're not signing on to have necessarily accomplished everything 100% and check the boxes. I can tell you the country that I come from, the United States of America, it took us several years to make progress in terms of meeting the recommendations of the Code of Conduct. But one thing it does is immediately open the door to IAEA assistance, should that member state be interested. So same thing with nuclear security, it's always upon request. But these are really important perspectives to note. So on the question of SMRs and climate change, I think it's really important to think about security in the context of climate change. And I think the link is that in order for those countries who've determined that they want to utilize carbon neutral nuclear energy to meet future nuclear, or future energy demands rather, they're going to possibly have new facilities, possibly new and advanced reactor technologies such as SMRs. It's up to them, it's a national decision. But they'll have more nuclear materials in their country. And so for those countries that determine they need assistance with security, with that expanded footprint, we'll be there. And that's simply, I think, the link there. But you're raising some really important issues for dialogue and debate. So thank you.
And now I think we're going to go over to finally our online participants who've been waiting very patiently.
Thanks,
Tony.
Ingrid. So
Thank you.
I will summarize the questions, so put them together. And I'll start off with the controversial one.
Okay.
So why do we need the Code of Conduct? The member states that get support from the IAEA, it's mandatory for them to follow the safety standards. They don't have a choice. I'm not so sure about security. So what does the Code of Conduct add to the existing nuclear safety standards, security guidelines? What does it add to what's already existing?
So what does the Code of Conduct add to what is existing?
To the standard.
Yes.
Well, it's a good question. What the agency had before was standards, which people said are not mandatory, which is really not completely correct, because it's mandatory in many relationships, and conventions, where the country take a legally binding commitment. At that moment, there were a number of countries that would not accept a convention, would not accept to negotiate a convention, for a number of political reasons that will take a lot of time to discuss. Therefore, the idea was what to do. We remain with the standards, which some people believe that are not mandatory in that sense, or we try to find something else. And was this idea to look for a code de la bonne conduite, something that will be equivalent to a convention without the legally binding element to the convention. But from the point of view of the content, is very similar to a convention, very similar. There are pronouncements of the country of what they are going to do, what they commit to do morally, let's say, not legally. For it's very similar, and that is what added. In my example of the finance minister will not care on one standard of the agency to provide money to a regulator. But the finance minister will see that if there is a letter of the President of the Republic saying, I comply with the code, he will provide the money. And this is what has happened in simple terms.
But I think also if we look at what you have been saying up to now, in terms of how this is addressing safety and security at the same time, how you have, there was nothing expressly there at the time when you had the Guyana incident, and if you look at how this has developed over time, and the benefits of bringing stakeholders together within countries to understand and to be able to manage the sources from cradle to grave, right? That is the benefit of this code. For me, is very clear, and I think after this discussion, it's even clearer.
Maybe similar, to make a parallel, you can say the same about the denial of shipment. Say you have regulation of transport. If the people comply the regulation, should not be problems. There are problems. There are problems.
Yes.
And the transport regulation do not solve that problems.
That's it, exactly.
Yeah. And for that reason, people are exploring something different. I mentioned that was a proposal of Brazil initially, and in the last General Conference, Australia called for a parallel meeting to a General Conference. It was very successful.
To look at addressing the denial of shipments. Yes.
Yes,
And
to look for a code of conduct on the denial of shipment.
so
For countries are trying to solve the problems when the problems are not solved by the standards.
let's take the next question from the online.
Right, so a more direct question is, how does the Code of Conduct support the security of radioactive sources during civil unrest or conflict, war situations?
How does the Code of Conduct support security of radioactive sources during conflict or war situations? Do you want to take a stab at that?
Absolutely. So I think, the answer is that it would support the security of radioactive sources in times of conflict or unrest, much in the same as it would in peacetime. So, and I don't mean to be flippant. It doesn't, specifically apply or not apply to those situations. It simply provides some recommendations and some good practices that I think are relevant across the board.
Okay.
I can add a statement.
Sorry, yes.
Yeah,
yes.
please.
And that is that the Code of Conduct says that every country should have capacity to carry out threat assessment. So whether in the time of peace or in the time of conflict, the first thing is there is no security if there is no threat statement for radioactive sources. So if the security, the security measure is meant to defeat the adversaries or the threats that have been identified in the threat statement. So, in terms of a source in regular use, with all the requirements, you still have to look at what is the threat statement, and every country has capability to do this. So, in terms of conflict, definitely the threat will be different, and then
You will apply.
You have to apply measures that defeats those adversaries that were identified. Thank you.
Teresa, yes, yes.
I always have this experience of when it comes to threat, when under siege. There's some organizations that we need to have the implementation of security, more so to have a memorandum agreement with law enforcement and also in the military to help us, to help that organization to protect their asset. There's one example that we have an experience in the Philippines and Zamboanga siege. There was some conflict in military and some insurgencies. It is in the middle. There's this hospital in the middle of the conflict. So with the regulatories, collaborations with the stakeholders, we were able to protect this hospital with the teletherapy during that siege. So at least we have my suggestions, or what we experience is we have an open communication with our stakeholders to even protect in securing these assets.
Okay, one other thing is that if you do a threat, if you conduct a threat assessment, you always find out that the operator is able to protect within a kind of range, and after that, the operator is not able to protect, and that will be beyond design basis threat.
Beyond design basis
and
threat.
at that point,
Okay.
it is the responsibility of the government. Just bringing what she said, the government has to be responsible for these sources directly by bringing.
So that's where that collaboration between the government and the operator comes.
Yeah.
Sorry, you wanted to add?
We have to say that I myself participated in hundreds of meetings on safety and security, and people were proposing, let's put this requirement. I don't remember once that somebody put the hand and said, and what happens if there is a war? This was out of the picture.
Yeah.
But it happened, and it happened before, and basically the answering that question, what you're going to do. I remember one case in which we have to participate. In Kabul, in Afghanistan, the control of sources was more or less reasonable, let's put it that way. The sources were in the hospital, and during the war, the hospital was bombed. And the place where the sources were bombed. And Kofi Annan called desperately El Baradei and said, do something to control the sources. What you are going to do? To say to the people, sorry, when you bomb, be careful, be careful that the bomb don't fall, In a war, this type of rules do not exist.
Do not exist, yeah. We're going to get to our audience again. Let's just get back to, is there more questions, online questions? How many do we have?
No, I think there's just one
One
more
more?
question
Okay.
that I will address, which is countries that are interested in nuclear power and either interested or already embarking on it, and they would obviously have to deal with radioactive waste as well. And how can the code of conduct be used to help improve public's confidence about controlling radioactive waste and the safety and security aspects surrounding that? Can it be used, in fact?
Who wants to take a shot at that? You?
Absolutely, yes, yes. So the Code of Conduct doesn't cover radioactive waste. There are a number of instruments and guidance documents and mechanisms at the agency that do specifically speak to that, but it wouldn't be covered under this mechanism. So unfortunately, that's outside of my area of expertise, Sue.
For public confidence, that is very interesting, but the people like more the expression code of conduct, code de la bonne conduite, than a standard.
In a standard. Yeah.
People have more confidence if there is a code of conduct. It's psychological, but I believe that is, I noticed that.
Yeah, I certainly think anything that raises security and safety levels within a country, anything that increases the transparency about the safety, security, and peaceful applications of nuclear or radioactive material kind of contributes to that public confidence, but certainly when it comes to radioactive waste, that would not be included under the code. But it's a great question nonetheless.
But you were saying, I just want to quickly check, so in the Code of Conduct, it does cover from cradle to grave. So that's the
Yes.
disposal
Yes.
of radioactive
Right.
sources.
So we wouldn't necessarily consider radioactive sources as waste. In most cases, they still have some useful activity or some economic value. Even if they're entirely disused and spent, it's not necessarily considered to be radioactive waste in the way that we
That's
think of it.
fascinating. I never knew that. So that's
And
really
An asset.
the guidance.
Asset.
True.
That's why we have
the supplementary guidance.
the supplementary guidance
Absolutely.
on, so it's seen as an asset.
Well, I mean, there is a very clear recent example, no? Where with the radium sources that now, you know, that there is a radioisotope that is very, very effective now in some cancer treatments, actinium, and it's very expensive.
Argentinium.
It's very expensive. And there was a research done in Canada, I believe, that showed that you can produce it via radium. And therefore, many people are repenting that they threw the sources of radio away as a waste, when there was an asset that should have been preserved. You know.
Dr. Bello mentioned in some cases a state may be able, depending upon technical specifics in the application of the source, they actually may be able to recycle the source, which is one of the options that's considered in the guidance on the management of disused sources. But it's something that we saw very clearly during COVID-19, actually, when supply chains were disrupted. A lot of countries moved towards recycling sources,
the
which is a
sources.
great option. In some cases, not all, but in some, it's absolutely advantageous and achievable.
Fantastic.
Well, in the Philippines, when we go into management of disused sources, we have the interim waste disposal. So that is one way of solving the management of disused sources in our country. When we do some decommissioning, we have some campaigns, and if you cannot bring that to a manufacturer, back to the manufacturer, maybe you can discuss it to PNRI, that we can have make an arrangements when with your disused sources. That's why also there are some efforts when it comes to the borehole disposals that I think Malaysia is also have one.
Yes.
And in particularly for the public, you need to give them some awareness or even an outreach of why waste disposal is also important in making safety and also in securing all our sources, radioactive sources itself. So it all depends on the strategy of the government or your country itself. If you're rich enough, you can transport it back to the manufacturer, to the origin, or have a facility that would address these disused sources and manage these disused sources.
So we'll have one more question from here for the moment, and then because I want us to get, and is there anyone else who wants in the audience to ask a question? Okay, we'll stick to these two questions, and then we're going to talk just about the way ahead as we close. Thank you.
I'm from an NGO. Just because you mentioned hospitals, we know we have the war in Ukraine, and we know what's up in Ukraine, but do you know about Gaza? They are bombing the hospitals there too. Do you know what is up there?
Where?
In Gaza.
Oh, okay. Where? In Gaza. Your question?
Hi, I'm a journalist from China. Thanks so much for this very informative briefing. I have been working in the ASEAN countries for a decade, so I heard a lot about COC in South China Sea. But actually, for me, the first time to heard about COC in this kind of a nuclear area. And actually, for me personally, I have no idea whether China is a signatory to the COC or not. So that you see, not that well known, like among the public about the COC. So this afternoon, I heard lots about one of the keywords I heard that it's a non-binding, the COC. So I have two questions to follow up.
Not legally binding.
Not legally binding. Okay.
Okay. The difference. Okay.
And so if it is not legally binding, so just now he just said that now there's 101 countries who are joining it. So if it's not legally binding, so why countries are hesitating to join it? Okay, this is the first question. The second one, if it's not legally binding, what will be the consequence? So if the signatories who broke it, so can you give me an example? Thank you.
Well, there is no the point of view of legal consequence, there will be no consequence. It's not legally binding, there is no consequence. But there can be other type of consequence. I mean, if a country is clearly seen violating a commitment of the government, even if it's not legally binding, this country will have a lot of problems. This country will have a lot of problems. Therefore, I mean, what we have to recognize, and I tell you that for me was a surprise, I tell you the truth, was a surprise, that when the document is not legally binding, but has a level of commitment at the high level in the government, is very effective. Sometimes it's even more effective than the legally binding document. Because the legally binding documents go through the Congress. And in the Congress there are politicians, you know, there are very special people. I mean, people who will modify something for a complete different reasons of the purpose of the modifying. During the Convention on Nuclear Safety, there were people negotiating in Congress, in one country, negotiating the approval of the Convention on Nuclear Safety against the approval of a law of abortion. Nothing to do.
Yeah. We know which country that is.
Yeah, in this case, to my surprise, this type of commitments, not legally binding, sometimes are more effective. In the legally bindings, the other problem is that take a lot of time. See, since the country agreed until the country ratified, that is after the process of the Congress, sometimes take 5 years. While in this case, it's immediate. I mean, the code is approved, a letter is sent by the Director General, the country said, yes, I agree, and boom.
And from that point, as you were saying, then the IAEA is able to support that country upon its request, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a great question. So we now have 151 countries who have expressed a political commitment to the code. Slightly less for the import-export, and the DSRS management guide is a newer document, so we're still trying to get those numbers up. I think we've got even more room to grow in terms of countries that have expressed a political commitment to the DSRS management guide. But in my mind, there are three big reasons why a state would find it advantageous to make a political commitment. I think the first is to demonstrate their belief of the importance of safety and security, and to demonstrate that they're committed to safety and security of radioactive sources at the highest level. It's a wonderful, wonderful way to make clear to the board and to the world, really, their commitment to these. I think the second reason could be that they actually find these recommendations and they find the instrument helpful. And that not only do they find it helpful, but they would perhaps in some cases like agency assistance. And so once they've said, hey, we've made a political commitment, we now need your help to get there, you know, we always say yes. The third reason, I think, and this gets back to one of the excellent questions that we got from our online audience about the benefit, and the third that I hear all the time is harmonization. Yes. So it's particularly important for the import-export issues. So if I'm going to export a source that's manufactured in my country, I want to ensure that I know that it will be safely and securely managed in that recipient country, that they know how to manage it, that they have adequate safety and security, that it's authorized to be exported over there. The code can help you do all these things, but it also allows all of the participants an opportunity to say, first of all, we care about all of these things, they're important. B, here's the kind of level of excellence that we're committed to reaching eventually. But more importantly, it provides a forum for them to share good practices and to talk about some of these challenges of implementation and regulation that all nations face. And so one of the things we hear whenever we host a conference or an open-ended meeting, we hear everybody, their most important goal for the week is to hear from other member states and share best practices. And so I think harmonization is key here.
Harmonization is key, yeah. So perhaps we can just kick off now with when we're looking towards the way ahead. What can we do better? What do we need to do? Why do we need what more do we need to do to universalize this very important code of conduct?
Yeah, great question. So in terms of universalization, it really has to do with raising awareness of the role of radioactive sources for every member state, helping those member states raise awareness for their senior political leaders, and then continuing to encourage universalization because of the benefits of the code to every nation, but also the harmonization value of the code. We held an open-ended meeting of legal and technical experts last June. Dr. González gave video remarks. He couldn't be there in person, but gave some fantastic remarks about how and why the code was developed and what it accomplishes. But one of the things that we wanted to do at that open-ended event was not just celebrate the 20-year milestone and the accomplishments that we've reached, but also try to identify what gaps remain, what are still the challenges for member states, and what is changing in the international landscape, maybe from a safety or security perspective, maybe from a technological perspective, that we need to address. And so we designed that event to be really interactive. We didn't just have the usual member state presentations. We had panels. We had an interactive session every day where we utilized Slido to facilitate dialogue and ask questions and really get some good feedback from member states about their continued challenges and what we need to do in the future. We even did a hypothetical scenario-based policy discussion, which is a fancy word for a tabletop exercise, with a hypothetical scenario that was based very much on the real world about challenges in international coordination, particularly during shipment and import and export, and the kind of result of that, which wound up with a source being dragged off a ship and a ship left in port. We see this. These incidents that happen in the real world where radioactive sources are maybe held up, they're not usually because of a safety or security reason. But nonetheless, when that happens, it has safety and security implications. And so through all of these interactive events, we really got a good sense from the participants about what they think we need to focus on next. And so a couple things became clear. First of all, 75% of participants said their number one issue they'd like to talk about in the future is emerging technologies and new technologies for radioactive sources, including maybe alternative technologies that are not source-based, but also just new technologies overall. We also heard, as we have heard for a while now, that transshipment is really an issue. Lots of challenges associated with that. And again, that is inherently an international issue, because most every country imports or exports sources. So real need for international coordination and harmonization there. We heard the need for strategies for sealed sources, these disused sealed sources, as we heard, options for reuse and recycle. These were all issues. And then we also heard a lot, and sometimes we hear this in other fora too, about changing workforce demographics, about needing to bring in a new generation of safety and security experts, about knowledge transfer and knowledge management and all sorts of these issues, as well as computer security. These were all some of the big picture things that states are thinking about. And so we've committed to take these on board, and as we develop new workshops and conferences and symposia, we'll have more focused discussions and events that focus on this, and of course continue to press for universalization. It's a mouthful, isn't it? Yes, thank you.
Thank you, Heather. I'm going to start with Teresa. It's your nameplate because it's got the Maria Teresa. Sorry. I'm going to start with Teresa, and if you can close from your side, and then we'll work our way through the rest of the panel, about what do you think, what are you the most concerned about looking towards the future? Where do you think more can be done, and what are your suggestions?
For us, the regulator, we need to have a close coordination, collaborations with our operators, because they're the ones who will be using these sources, and how the regulator be able to help out these operators when they have some issues. We always say the regulators are not the police, we are not making sure that you're doing bad things, but we are there to help you out. With all the things that is being discussed, the issue of denial of shipment, the management of these sources, these are big issues, not only in my country, but also in the rest of the global community. All we have to do is we just have to accept that there's this gap and how we're going to address it. So I think that is more important than making regulations, making sure that an outreach, making sure that from top to bottom, from the senior officials down to the technicians understand the importance of securing and safety of these radioactive sources and have a common language. They don't have a miscommunication of what does this mean and what this does not. So a lot of work have to be done yet.
Thank you, Teresa. And Abel, as we turn to you also,
Yeah,
and
we mentioned.
yes, sorry, can I just say, and Nasiru, can we also just consider as expanding access to peaceful uses in the basis of this? How do we ensure that this contributes to expanding access to peaceful uses? But start with what you were saying.
No, yeah,
Sorry.
I simply, we have mentioned several issues for the future.
Absolutely.
No, already. But there is one that usually the people don't mention and worries me, and is the states which are not recognized in the United Nations system, and where at least I have been involved in two problems, with serious problems with radioactive sources. And I imagine that there are much more. One example is Transnistria. Transnistria is one state that Moldova said that it's part of Moldova, but they don't recognize Moldova. It's after the Dniester River. Well, there a source was melted, a big source. And when you melt a source, you can contaminate other countries, like happened in one source that was melted in Mexico and contaminated part of US. This was one example. It's not yet solved. The other is Abkhazia, part away of Georgia. Georgia says mine, but Abkhazia do not recognize Georgia. Well, one of the biggest sources that we discovered wasn't the limit between Abkhazia and Georgia, and was somebody bringing the source from Abkhazia into Georgia. And that was a serious problem, even to recover that source. Therefore, I believe that nobody is taking care of, there are many states which are not recognized or have recognized it, in the last Board of Governors, the problem with Palestine, for instance, and where really the control of sources is an international approach for control of sources is very complicated. How you do it?
But especially, and as we've heard before, in countries where there are war or where there are challenges.
Even if there is, in this moment, in Transnistria,
yes.
there are not wars,
Yes.
but there is nobody controlling.
Yes. But so as we, and I think this is one of the issues that we continue to face, right? And that we also, as these countries have member states that are surrounding them, that are neighbors, and that's where the importance of communication and outreach is so important, and high-level outreach, and promoting the benefits of the Code of Conduct and its universalization, per se. And so, to you, Nasiru.
Okay, thank you very much. I think that the IAEA is doing their best. Eta made mention of the open-ended meeting, which I know has been successful over the years, several participation, and there have been so many innovations these days about tabletop and so on and so forth. I just want to say that I think we need to look at the possibility of going to the different regions where we think that some level of political commitment is absent to provide some kind of awareness. Personally, I haven't participated in several INSP review meetings. I know that the issue of creating awareness among senior government officials comes in one of the days in the week. And perhaps some of this time during that one day could be dedicated to the universalization of the code of conduct. The IAEA also have several regional activities, national activities, international activities going on with regards to radioactive sources. I think conscious effort should be made to elicit the consciousness in all the participants about what the state, what each country stands to benefit with regards to submitting the political commitment to the Director General of IAEA with regards to the code of conduct. We need to do more of this. We ought to remember the accident which Abel spoke about, and I think that we shouldn't have such again in this century. I want to believe that there have been several awareness, but
so when it comes down to basically, we need to do more in terms of outreach and in terms of creating awareness. And I think this is where the diplomatic community can really play a very important role, because you are the ones who are engaging with your foreign ministries at the highest level. And also, you know, civil society. It's not just up to the role, and not only to the IAEA to do this, but civil society organizations where we can have these kind of discussions and where we can learn more about the benefits, also the benefits of peaceful uses, because disconnected from the benefits of peaceful uses for our daily challenges and how do we treat more people, heal more people, feed more people with nuclear applications and mitigate climate change. We can only do that if it is safe, secure and responsible use. So I'd like to thank you all. Thank you for coming. Thank you for staying with us online. And thank you for our wonderful panel. If you can join me in some applause. And then for all our in-person participants, there is a evaluation form which we would really appreciate you to just fill in before you go. Just a quick evaluation so we can see how we can do this better. Thank you so much and have a lovely day and the rest of your week. Thank you.